Can you hear me now?
Yes, Maharaj.
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay. Okay.
We can't see you though. Oh, there now we can see you.
You can see me? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm driving in a car. Sometimes it may go off. I'm going to this wedding. I'm leaving now because I'm going to visit my niece on the way. And my niece had visited me. She's right on the way. She had visited me in Vrindavan, and she actually traveled for 2 weeks with Leela Vilasini through India. So she has some kind of samskar like that. So what I thought I would do, because I'm assuming only a few people here will go to the wedding, so I'm going to tell you what my wedding speech would be, and I hope you find it kind of interesting. And of course, it's not just devotees, but their parents are there too. So, yeah, so, and this is also, I learned this speaking technique. There's a book called Something for a Change by Andy Stanley, who's a excellent contemporary Christian preacher who people like Rasanath, I think even Raghunath, have kind of studied for how expert he is in communicating. And he had this simple way of giving a lecture. And it was I, you, God, you, we, rather than taking extensive notes. So I means you have to introduce yourself, especially to an audience. An audience, they don't all know you. And if you don't have that rapport, so whatever the subject you speak on, you have to first introduce it with yourself. Then you have to make it relevant, the problem to people. Then God. God means then you give all the facts. And a problem with a lecture is people just start with the facts and they have no rapport with the audience. And then you, again, you make it relevant to the people. And then you give them a vision what would happen if you actually follow it. But I'm not exactly going to follow that. But I think I would start off the way I would introduce myself. And I'm just going to not give the lecture, but explain to you what I would do. How nice it is to drive in Don Cayley's Tesla when you're giving a class and his hands are not on the wheel and he's and quiet. And it's all electric. He doesn't have to pay for gas. It's all free. So someone's calling me and I can't answer it. In this lecture, because I'm a monk and I've never been married. And I think that's a real nice way. I'm not just giving the lecture. I thought about it. That's a nice way to begin the lecture, because it introduces myself and it introduces the subject, which is, speaking about marriage, etc. And then maybe mention just a little something about how Prabhupada saw renunciation is dedication. So even he gave wedding ceremonies, even did the wedding ceremonies. And, even here we have Rasik Mohan, who's also a monk, who's going to do it. my mud color cloth. This is the traditional color, and literally the term is kasaya. Kasaya means real dress is finished. So being finished, and he's dead at a wedding, what we think in our. So I think there's something, and also I want to make sure it's short. And then I would say what my two qualifications are. One, I think I know the couple at practically as well as anyone. No, of course, the mothers, and during COVID, I rushed home from Russia. I was in Russia. I didn't want to get stuck in Russia because and how long will she be here? And I went, and then when I got to my place for 20 years, upstate New York, wasn't available, and it wasn't going to be available. It was a whole, whatever the case is, the kind people that gave me a house for so many years during COVID needed it for their own elders. It's quarantined, and then really understood now that they needed the house. And Leela and Jamuna, they were so kind. They said, we're going to get an extra bedroom. Our family can come. Our mothers can visit, stay, but they'll only come a short time. So we have a room for you. And it was so kind. So I really got to know them. And then I'll say something about what I saw there, and why I think they'll be a good husband and wife. And I said, I think the second qualification is just, I can put it in context of our philosophy, what a samskara is. It's an impression, vivaha samskara, what the impression that is being given here is, and it's for commitment, and how important commitment is, because what's the problem with the world? People have no character. They just act by their whims. And what one of the whims is what? Well, he did this to me, she did this to me, let's get divorced. It's so whimsical. And then, we talk about the gun violence and of course assault weapons and things like that, and the need to, check perhaps the weapons that are in people's hands and things like that. But I wrote that article. This is one of the main causes, that there's no character, there's no principles. And people should learn to make vows, and they should have honesty and keep to those vows. Anyway, that's my basic strategy. And the people who come to the wedding will find out the rest. Okay, now, what also I'm going to talk about, which I think is kind of interesting, is my latest Monday morning greetings, which you'll see. And 1 second, what did I do here? Okay. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Is my latest Monday morning greetings, which I was writing, and it's called Street Unicorns. And I showed it to some people, but not all. But there's a beautiful book that's been printed by a really, I think, a pretty prominent photographer, and just about taking pictures of unique fashion in New York. And somehow he saw me walking with Madhava, and then he put my picture in. along with all these other far out people. So what that's going to be about, and I'm sorry I can't do the Shastra here, what that's going to be about is kind of wanting to share this picture. It's Krishna conscious. And I thought like the interesting part is that what a street unicorn with him is someone with authenticity that expresses it boldly in fashion. It's kind of like to him, it's like an honesty. This is who I am. And so I was just contrasting. That's where I got this idea. Term, I think it means mud, dirt. It's like it's supposed to be the address. Of course, we're preachers. Material, attract. Dress is one of the ways we attract the opposite sex. It's one of the ways we, I think we should dress nicely. I always appreciate, but I'm just saying, technically speaking, that's not myself. And so I thought it was kind of ironic. In the other sense, I thought him and dedicated monk, there is a dress, there is a uniform. A uniform means something. It gives you a mood. A uniform means people could identify with you. It's like a policeman. It has a uniform. It should give him a mood of some. It should give a mood of some kind of discipline, some kind of, mood of officer of the law. And you can identify that person for help. So in the same sense, the dress is there. This is kind of like a priestly dress in one sense, so there is an authenticity there. But on the other hand, I thought also it has that aspect of being very bold, and the aspect of, it's transplanted. So at least it used to be, wow, this is different. This is very different. And the other point he made, he was a very good writer. He described that what a place like New York is, and his description like really hit on the head the genius of Prabhupada coming to New York, or the genius of Krishna sending Prabhupada to New York, because what he described is what New York is in small towns, nonconformity doesn't flourish. So people who have that mood, they tend to gravitate towards New York City. And people who have that mood tend to be people that are creative. I mean, the artistic psychology is I am authentic. That's the artistic psychology. And those of you who've studied the Enneagram, the number 4 in the Enneagram, well, what describe what an artist is, and it's not every artist, but one type of artist, the person who's really unique, really different, really likes to stand out. They had no relationship with their parents. It didn't mean that it was abusive, but it creates a lot of emotions that you can't identify with because you can't place them in any particular parental category. So what happens with those emotions is it just creates a need to actually be able to understand them. So it creates a person who's always trying to individuality out into the public. And if you see the pictures in the book, it's exactly the type of people that they are. Then they have that flair for like dress, etc. So But at the same time, it's so New York is a place that facilitates that. And he said, and because of that, it becomes a place that people either tolerate or accept or welcome people who are different. And it's traditionally like that. So when the Krishna consciousness movement started, where in other places it could really be met with hostility because it was so different, because the cultures were so uniform, and they, even, other cities in New York, the person who's different, they'll be looked on with much more, they'll be looked on with less suspicion than any other place in the world. And he said what happens is, and it's a very, we'll get that type of person. And he says, and that's why in these places, trends and movements are born. And then I thought, wow, that's a great description. That is how what happened with Prabhupada in New York. The devotees were accepted more than any other place in the world. To the extent there was one, this is really far out, there was one advertising New York. And they had a mayor in New York who was really, really a character. His name was Ed Koch. You see, I feel like I'm in a time warp with most people, but he was a real character. And his saying was, how I'm doing, how I'm doing. So he had one advertisement where someone was going to jump from the Empire State Building. He was advertising for New York, and he was going to save them. So he was saying, so he looked at the person. And he said, "Don't jump, don't jump. We have Broadway. I'm jumping. Don't jump, don't jump. We have Yankee Stadium. Don't jump. Don't jump, don't jump. We have Central Park. Don't jump, don't jump. We have the Hare Krishnas." So the person didn't jump, but the idea was it was adopted. It was part of the scene. So I thought that point was also interesting, the kind of acceptance in New York. And I thought also in a very interesting way, if I was wearing slacks and a baseball cap, he never would have, took my picture. Anyway, you'll see the picture of the book. Okay, we're doing so good so far. Yeah. Now, another thing I'd like to share is Satyaraj asked me to write an article for Journal of Vaishnav Study. And because it's on Krishna Lila. And he knew I had this idea about Brahma Vimohan Lila. So I'm writing that article and I can share with you. And this was my idea it was the last pastime that Srila Prabhupada wrote was Brahma Vimohan Lila. It was the last pastime that Prabhupada wrote. And and I began to study it. And when I began to study it, I found, to me, arguably his deepest purports. And then I was kind of astounded because I was there when he was writing it. and he was on his bed. I mean, he was indisposed, and he was lying down, and Jumda was reading him 9 commentaries on each 8 or 9 commentaries on each purport. So Prabhupada was in this condition, and I knew the condition because I used to go. Yeah, I was so busy. At 4:30, my service started in the morning, and it went to 8:30 at night, and there wasn't really a break. That's what the Gurukul service was. But at a particular time, Prabhupada did a very amazing thing in his room. In his house, there used to be a guard at Prabhupada's door. And actually his secretary would sit in the little room before you get to Prabhupada. And it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj or someone else, but usually him. And you couldn't just get into Prabhupada without an appointment. But I think about a month before he's about to leave, Prabhupada said, leave the doors open 24 hours a day. So you literally could sit with Prabhupada anytime you wanted. But I had no time. And when B.B. Govinda Swami actually told me this, they opened the doors. And he said, well, why don't you can just go in. You can just go in beforehand. You can just go in beforehand. Why don't you just go in? So I would go in, and this is the last 2 weeks with Prabhupada. I would go in at 2:30 and chant my rounds, and no one was there except his assistant. And then one day I was sitting there, and I think I told many of this, and Prabhupada was actually screaming, but he was screaming Hare Krishna. And Bhavananda said, help me lift Prabhupada up and move him to a more comfortable position. And then he told me that Prabhupada the last 6 months was only taking a certain amount of milligrams of pomegranate juice and there was no fat between his bones and his nerves, and it was so painful for him. So, and then I'm reflecting on it, one sadhu told me, bait nahi TK, seer nahi TK. If the stomach is not good, the head is not good. So it's really hard to think. And just imagine he had to assimilate 8 or 9 translated purports in his head. And then he had to speak on them, laying on his back. And that's how he wrote those purports. And as far as I understood, the last breath where he could actually speak was finishing up the purports. And what struck me is that it finished up the Brahma Vimohan Leela, which neatly ended the Kumar Leela. Which is Krishna 1 to 5. And I thought, is there some significance here? Is it something divine that he put so much of his last effort to finish up this this purport, and then I began to kind of, I started reading the next chapter, and the next chapter is the chapter that begins the next age of Krishna, which is Poganda. And the commentators say that his age, he now is matured, he can get the cows and he can go to the forest. He has the cows now and he can go to the forest. And that his age and the activities he can do now facilitate a greater variety of pastimes, because when you get older, you can do more things. And then at the end of the chapter, we actually see the gopis. So I thought that the whole Bhagavatam is systematically structured so that we can actually hear Krishna's pastimes without prejudice and projecting our own material, mundane conceptions on them. And to be free from that, that's what the Bhagavatam is doing. That's why there's 10 subject matters, but 9 are meant for the 10th. And the 10th is the Ashraya. And the Ashraya is spoken in the 10th canto. So I looked at it, this is really progressive. So, and what is the most difficult to understand as thinking, how do people understand this? It just seems kind of mundane unless you have some vision. So the Bhagavatam is carefully preparing one for this. And then comes this point where it finally happens. What is before that point? And what is the last thing before that point? And the last thing before that point is this incredible pastime where Bala Kali, this young boy who's so playful and just eating, and Lord Brahma becomes confused. Is it Bala Kali or Yagyabuk? Is he the one that eats all the yagyas, the sacrifices? He so starkly presents that Bala Kali, that young boy, is Yagyabuk. And there's no story in the Bhagavatam that so vividly illustrates that. Because it's all of a sudden this young boy manifests and then he's sitting again as a young coward boy at the end, and Lord Brahma is becoming bewildered. So I thought that there is some significance here by either Prabhupada's conception of the Bhagavatam, or it's a real pleasure driving in a Tesla and giving a class. It's so quiet. Is it divine will or but somehow or other, Prabhupada finishes this pastime. And I thought that that's so important to his legacy, because one of the things of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, one of the legacies of Bhakti Siddhanta so strongly was where you jump into to really have you have to be purified. Yeah. I'm 5 minutes until I'm at my niece's, but I'm so glad that we could speak together, and I could share something. Again, I've been saying for a couple of months, I got to settle on a book. And that also is my joy. I really miss it. You know, even in Vrindavan, it just seems that I've been speaking, even when I went to Russia, to Mayapur, I used to speak 6-7 days a week. You know, now I kind of, I speak too, and I'm fine. And in Vrindavan, you know, in Vrindavan, I used to speak every day and go sometimes people there or not. So I kind of miss that contiguous thing, but I really want to do that. And just to let you know my schedule, I'm going to the wedding here in Bhakti Bandhav. I think quite a few people are coming. It looks like it's going to be quite interesting. Really love the people at Bhakti Bandhav. And then I'll come back upstate, and Sachinandana Swami is coming. And I'll stay to meet him, but then I'm going to go. Donna Cayley, he's got a new house on the lake. You like it? Yeah. Okay, he can't wait. So he has his house, so I'll go. And then after the Rath Yatra, my main man, Amala Vaishnav, will drive me to Connecticut. And Varsana Lali, Lisa Marchand, her and her husband, they bought this place called the Talent Inn. It has about 15 rooms. So there'll be one room for me. And it's like a bed and breakfast, not a bed and breakfast, just Airbnb. Her family used to do that. So she knows how to do that. So I'll stay there. Probably on my way back, I'll stop at the Hartford Rath Yatra. It's on the 18th. How to get back to New York City. I'll figure that out later. Are you going to go to the Hartford Rath Yatra? Oh, great. Okay. That's great. Okay. Okay, Jamuna Jaya, you still hear anything?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for class, and thank you. I've never been in a Tesla, so thank you for taking us in a Tesla.
What's that? I can't hear you or see you somehow.
All right, well, I can see me. Let me speak more into the mic. Can you hear me now?
Is it me or is it?
You're really breaking up, guys, so it might be you. I don't know. Can you hear me? You're all frozen. I don't know if I'm frozen. I don't know. Oh, you're gone. But if you can hear me, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your reflection.
Say.
Can you? Oh.
A little bit. Try. Oh.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Raj? I don't know.
It's broken up. It's broken up.
Okay. Okay.
Let me see if it's right. No, I have a lot of bands. Okay, anybody else want to say hello?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
I guess we'll